Chapter 7. Tea and Bombs. "Mrs. Hudson!" Sherlock said loudly, announcing his presence in 221B Baker Street as he stormed in, an exasperated Amelia trailing after him, John and Lestrade not too far behind. "We require your assistance." "I think she got that, Sherlock," Amelia muttered, elbowing the detective in the side, biting back a smirk when he jumped and immediately glared at her. Amelia sighed and leaned up against a wall, playing chess against the computer on her phone. A moment later, Mrs. Hudson came trotting out of 221A, holding the keys to 221C, handing the keys to Sherlock, who hesitated before opening the door. "That door's been open recently," Sherlock said quietly. "Obviously," Amelia scuffed, tucking her phone away. "The chips in the door frame gave it away. If it was older, the wood underneath would be discolored." Amelia pointed to a small crescent-shaped mark in the door. "The paint shifted away slightly. Did that a moment ago. The wood underneath is the same color as the other chips." She pointed to a different mark in the door. "That one's older. The wood's a different color." Sherlock stared at her a moment, then scanned the doorframe, validating her deductions. He nodded slightly. "No, can't be. That's the only key." Mrs. Hudson gestured to the key in Sherlock's hands, eyes widening in fear of someone breaking into 221C. Sherlock scuffed and removed the padlock. "Can't get anyone interested in this flat. It's the damp, I expect. That's the curse of basements. I had a place once where I was first married. Black mold up the walls." Mrs. Hudson trailed off as the straw slammed. Wait, I lost my spot. Okay. Mrs. Hudson trailed off as Lestrade slammed the door in her face. She dumped slightly. "Oh, men." Amelia followed Sherlock into a living room, stopping shortly after when her gaze fell upon a rather peculiar set of items sitting in the center of the living room. "Shoes," she said, slightly confused. "That's not weirdly suspicious or anything." She stepped into Sherlock's way as he started towards it. "Careful, Sherlock. He's a bomber, remember?" "I'm well aware," Sherlock muttered, walking around Amelia. He knelt down beside the trainers warily, palms on either side of the shoes, being careful not to touch it and ruin its forensic worth. Sherlock waved Amelia forward with two crooked fingers. "Safe?" "I'm not a demolition expert, Sherlock." "No, you're a strategist. So tell me, is it safe?" Amelia huffed and mumbled out a yes, before beginning to inspect the area around the shoes, searching for some sort of clue as to who broke in. Her sharp eyes spotted something in the corner, and she snuck towards it cautiously. Amelia retrieved a pair of black leather gloves from her pocket and pulled them out, then picked up the strange rectangular object. Printed on the paper was Earl Grey, James Moore tea. Amelia's mouth suddenly went dry, and her hands clenched into fists. Of course, she said darkly. "Of course he's behind this. Stupid Amelia." Her face contorted into a snarl, and she crushed the tea packet in her hands until the paper tore, revealing the tea bag inside. Sherlock tilted his head to the side curiously at Amelia's behavior, but made no comment, choosing instead to silently inspect the shoes. He stiffened as the pink phone started to ring. Amelia gave him an odd glance, then made a small gesture with her hand, prompting him to answer the phone. He took it out, frowning at the screen, which read, "Number locked." "Hello," he said. Amelia shooted him a brief, reassuring smile. "Hello, sexy. Is this the other one?" A woman sobbed on the other end, her voice cracking. "No, you're the other one, aren't you?" Sexy's voice is sweeter, and she's prettier, too. "Who's talking?" Sherlock demanded, brows furrowed. "Why are you crying?" "I'm not crying. I'm typing, and this stupid bitch is reading it out." The woman broke into sobs on the last word. Sherlock looked off in the distance. "The curtain rises," he whispers quietly. "What?" said John. "Nothing," Sherlock and Amelia said simultaneously. "No, what did you mean?" "I've been expecting this call for some time," Amelia said, taking the phone out of Sherlock's hands and holding it to her ear. "Listen, you, I've had enough of your games, so do yourself a favor and hang up, because I swear to you, I'll win this stupid game of yours if it means no one else is going to get killed." There was a long silence before the woman responded. 12 hours to solve my puzzle, kitten, or I'm going to be so naughty. Then the line went dead. "What do you mean you've been expecting this call?" John said, eyeing his sister as she handed the phone back to Sherlock. leaning against the wall, hands in her coat pockets. Is someone out to get you? She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Course someone's out to get me, John. I'm not exactly an easy person to put up with. She took out her phone as it buzzed, glaring angrily down at the message that awaited her. You're getting nosy, Amy. Be careful. J.M. Careful? Me? I've changed a lot since Cambridge. I'm not scared of you, Amelia. You should be. J.M. Amelia pursed her lips tightly and fiercely tapped out a reply. I'll see you on the battlefield, Amelia. I look forward to it. J.M. At St. Bartholomew's Hospital. Sherlock's thin lips were tightly pursed as he thought, trying to figure out why Amelia had been so shaken back at 221C. Moriarty was behind this, that much he knew. He briefly thought over the possibility of Amelia being Moriarty. She clearly had one hell of an alibi, but that didn't explain her reaction. So who do you suppose it was? John asked, leaning against the lab bench. His eyes flickered to Amelia, who was currently creating a sculpture out of various pieces of lab equipment, balancing graduated cylinders atop beakers, test tube holders holding the entire thing together. Amelia briefly glanced up at Sherlock's phone as Sherlock's phone trilled, letting out an audible shriek as she nearly knocked her creation over, and she scrabbled to keep it falling. Sherlock said absent-mindedly, trying not to smile at the youngest Watson. The woman on the phone. The crying woman, Amelia elaborated, eyes narrowed on her sculpture, readjusting positions of various things, trying to stabilize it. Oh, she doesn't matter, Sherlock said, turning to John. She's just a hostage. No lead there. For God's sake, Amelia exclaimed, one beaker falling off the counter and shattering on the floor. Amelia barely flinched, too busy glaring at Sherlock. He wasn't thinking about lead, Sherlock. He was trying to save her life, which is what you should be doing instead of... She trailed off, embarrassed by her slight overreaction. Instead of what? Sherlock pressed, just as shocked by her outburst as Amelia was. She barely talked since 221C, choosing instead to retreat into herself, not saying a word. Nothing, Amelia said quietly. Forget about it. You're not going to be much use to her, said Sherlock. Eyes narrowed on Amelia. Sentiment doesn't help anyone, Amelia. It inhabits you. It's a weakness. You don't think I already know that? Amelia said cryptically. You know, for a genius, you're really quite idiotic. That earned a sharp glare from Sherlock, but she didn't seem to notice, and instead crossed her arms over her chest, one eyebrow arched. You have no concept of how emotions work. You have no idea the pain, the anguish someone has to go through when someone they love dies. You're wrong, Sherlock muttered, barely loud enough for anyone to hear, then louder. You're not going to be much use to her, thinking like you are. Sympathizing with the victim doesn't find them. Being detached does. He gestured to the scanner he'd been working with, and then turned back to his work. Are you trying to trace the call? John interjected. He could practically feel the stress levels in the room rising as Sherlock became more and more interested in the case, and Amelia quickly began to lose her patience with the detective. Amelia scuffed and started to clean up the glass shards on the floor. The bomber's too smart for that, Amelia said, locating the broom and dustbin. She continued talking as she swept. If they could have traced the call, Lestrade would have done so already. I imagine the bomber is scrambling the signal. He's probably quite good at it, too. We'd be lucky to find out where the bomb is in a 15-mile radius. Sherlock's phone rang again. For God's sake, Sherlock, put that damn thing on silent. Sherlock ignored her remark. Pass me my phone, he said, without looking up from his microscope. Where is it? John looked around the room. Jacket, Sherlock said. John stiffened and began to walk over to Sherlock. But Sherlock gave him a dark look, silently telling him to back off. I was talking to Amy. Amelia pursed her lips but said nothing. Instead, she hopped over the lab bench, ignoring all the safety protocols, and landed softly beside Sherlock. She started to reach into his inside jacket pocket, but Sherlock let out a soft snarl. Careful! Just to spite him, Amelia made sure that the back of her hand hit his chin as she pulled it out. It's a text from your brother, she said. Ari, Bruce Partington plans. Any progress on Andrew West's death? Mycroft. Delete it. Miss All plans are out of the country now. Nothing we can do about it, Sherlock said dismissively. Well, said John, Mycroft seems to think it's important. Text you 8 times, and I have 3 emails from him, Amelia said, rolling her eyes. And I think it's important. Not that my opinion really counts on this matter. It isn't my area to deal with. West deals with Mycroft's department, not mine. Ergo, his death is on Mycroft. Well, I suppose I should be nice and help Mycroft out. But considering the fact that he's all but forcing me to babysit Sherlock, so I think not. Then why didn't he cancel his dentist appointment, Sherlock said, looking up from his microscope. Microscope. Exasperated. John blinked. His what? Mycroft never texts if he can talk, Sherlock explains. He sighed heavily. Look, Andrew West stole the missile plans, tried to sell them, got his head smashed in for his pains. End of story. The only mystery is this. Why is my brother so determined to bore me with somebody else when somebody else is being so delightfully interesting? Try and remember, there's a woman here who might die, John said tightly. What for? Hissed Sherlock. The hospital's full of people dying, Doctor. Why don't you cry by their bedside and see what good it does them? Ah! Sherlock's demeanor suddenly changed as the screen flashed with "Search complete." Amelia bit the inside of her lip and then dumped the glass into the bin marked glass disposal. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, half expecting it to be Mycroft. In fact, what awaited her was far worse. I'm going to pay you a visit, Amy dear, and if you don't play along, someone will pay the price. You know how it works. J.M. Chapter 8. The Devil Himself. I'm going for a walk, said Amelia, pocketing her phone. A scowl creased her face, and she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. She walked a short distance away, stopped halfway down the hill, leaning against the door of the locked laboratory. Room 386. J.M. Silently, Amelia searched for the room, keeping her head low as she passed several doctors and officials in uniform. When she nearly got stopped by a security guard, but she quickly made up a lie about how her aunt was in the intensive care unit, and how she couldn't stand sitting by her dying aunt's bedside. She sobbed a few crocodile tears, and then the sympathetic guard let her go, murmuring his condolences. People were far too easy to fool. Amelia stopped in front of room 386 and pushed open the door, posture immediately straightening as her gaze fell upon the dark-tanned man sitting atop a lab bench, nonchalantly tossing an apple in the air and catching it with ease. He didn't turn to face her, but his smile grew. Hello, Amy dear, he sang lightly in his Irish accent, still not looking at Amelia, but acknowledging her presence. Did you miss me? I can't say that I did, James, she said, trying to keep her voice from wavering as he hopped off the bench and began to circle her, a lion stalking his prey. Amelia wanted to shift under his predatory gaze, but she held her head high, looking down her nose at him. James Moriarty grinned slyly, lightly tapping her on the nose with a single finger. You're lying, he sang. I can tell when you're lying, and you're lying right now. I wouldn't advise you using the same words 3 times within 2 sentences. Makes you seem rather childish. Amelia brushed him off, taking on a condescending tone. You've gotten cheeky, Amelia dear. James' fingers lightly danced over Amelia's bare arms, electricing shivers. Years later, and his touch still affected her, which wasn't necessarily a good thing. James pushed a strand of her wispy dark hair behind her ear, watching the blush slowly creep up onto her cheeks. Perhaps this is for the better. You are living with great Sherlock Holmes, after all. You two going to get married and live a lovely domestic life together? He laughed, grinning mechanically. You've been watching me, then, I presume. Darling, he started in an almost loving tone, and if it weren't for the way his dark eyes glinted like shards of obsidian framed by long spiders' silk-like lashes, I have eyes, ears, and guns everywhere. His voice dropped to a mocking whisper, as if he were telling a secret that Amelia should never, not ever, speak aloud. Amelia rolled her eyes dramatically, not wanting to show her nervousness. I'm very well aware of that, James, she said snidely, pushing him away. Why are you here? Why now? I thought I'd pop by and pay my favorite Watson a visit. You may be able to tell when I'm lying, but it works the other way, too. Okay, fine. James' lips were pursed, and he gave a large, grandiose shrug. I came to see Sherlock, and unless you play along, he suddenly took a dark tone, their playful bantering a distant memory. I'm afraid I might just have to kill somebody. You wouldn't dare, seethed Amelia. Oh, I most certainly would, and you know that, James said, smiling once again. Are you ready to play, Mrs. Watson? Miss Watson? Piss off, James, was what Amelia wanted to say, but she suddenly found her words catching in her throat. She nodded, running her tongue over her cracked lips. Fantastic, James said with a smirk as Molly Hooper burst into the room, turning a bright crimson as her gaze fell upon Amelia and James. Amelia could see James' personality change in an instant, as if someone had flicked a switch. He slouched, back hunched over, and a weak smile flitted across his lips. Hi, Molly. Jim, Molly said, sounding curt. She turned to Amelia. I'm sorry, I didn't think we've... Amelia Watson, pleasure to meet you, Amelia said, forcing a smile to her lips as she shook Molly's outstretched hands. Jim and I used to work together. Ran into him by accident, she frowned, noticing the way that Molly moved closer and closer to James as Amelia spoke. I'm sorry, are you two together? Jimmy boy over here. Amelia punched him in the shoulder with more force than was necessary. Didn't say anything. Starting to slow down, Amelia smiled sheepishly. I can see why Sherlock likes you. Amelia blinked. Sherlock? He talks about you loads, Molly said, nodding. She blushed again. Sorry, I'm the specialist registrar down at the morgue. I provide Sherlock with his experiment materials. Molly coughed. I was just going to check up on Sherlock if you two wanted to come with. That'd be lovely. Amelia flashed her smile, ushering Molly out. Amelia turned back to look at James. The first chance I have, I'm throwing you over a bridge. Look forward to it. Any luck? Said Molly as she stepped into the lab Sherlock and John were currently occupying, eagerly eyeing Sherlock, hoping that he'd have some sort of clever solution to their problems. Oh yes, Sherlock said, unable to keep the excitement from leaking into his voice. He barely looked up as Amelia and James stepped into the lab. Amelia taking her spot by her partly destroyed sculpture, arms folded across her chest. Oh, sorry, I didn't, James murmured, hesitating by the doorway, as if required permission to enter the room. Jim, hi, Molly said, sounding eager to have James meet Sherlock. Come in, come in. Sherlock glanced up from his microscope momentarily, scanning the space between Molly and James with furrowed eyebrows. Molly gestured to the detective. Jim, this is Sherlock Holmes. He turned to John. John Watson, hi. John jerked his head towards Amelia. And she's Amelia, my sis. Jim and I used to work together, John. He knows who I am, Amelia muttered. No need for an unnecessary and rather boring introduction. She let out a diverse snort and then began to disassemble and reassemble her creation. John nodded, wandering towards Sherlock. Jim nodded, wandering towards Sherlock. So you're Sherlock Holmes, he titted in a London accent, more fake than his admiration for the detective. Molly's told me all about you. You want one of your cases? I really don't see how it matters to you, Jim, Amelia sneered. Jim works in IT upstairs, Molly said, sensing the tension. That's how we met. Office romance. Gay, Sherlock concluded, giving Jim another once-over. Amelia burst into laughing, hiding her mouth in her hand. Sherlock turned to her, eyebrows raised. Are you? Yeah, I'm fine, she said, coughing. Sorry, what? Molly said, her smile and laughter fading. Nothing, Sherlock said a little too quickly. Hey. Hey, Jim said, nodding. He leaned against the lab bench, causing a metal container to fall, clattering to the ground. Sorry. Sherlock pressed his lips together in irritation, but said nothing. Well, I'd better be off, said Jim, turning to Molly. I'll see you at the Fox. About 6-ish? Yeah, Molly said, sounding slightly forlorn. Bye. It was nice to meet you, Jim said to Sherlock. He turned to Amelia. Call me more often, will you? Yeah, sure, Amelia said, not looking up. Her hair fell over her eyes, and she blew it out of the way in frustration, focusing on her sculpture. What do you mean, gay? Molly demanded as soon as she'd shut the door. We're together. Here we go, Amelia muttered under her breath. And domestic bliss must suit you, Molly, said Sherlock, as if he was speaking to a child, which, in his mind, he was. You've put on 3 pounds since I last saw you. 2.5. Sherlock didn't look at the brunette. Nah, 3. He's not gay, Molly insisted angrily. Why'd you have to spoil... He's not! Sherlock snorted loudly, rolling his eyes when Amelia shot him a disapproving glare. With that level of personal grooming, he said sarcastically, earning another kick to the shin from Amelia. But because he puts products in his hair? I put products in my hair, John countered. You wash your hair. There's a difference, Amelia added in rather unhelpfully, biting back some colorful curse words as her phone buzzed. From Mycroft at mhomes.org. Subject, Bruce Bartoning plans. Message. I understand you have 3 years worth of days off, but unless you appreciate some rather interesting details about your past being leaked to the public, I suggest you get a move on the Bruce Bartoning plans. Sincerely, Mycroft Holmes. To Mycroft at mhomes.org. Subject, unnecessary reminders. Message. Tell you what, you try getting your brother to cooperate with you on something as simple as baking a cake, and you can get on my case about the lack of initiative over the recovery of the Bruce Partington's plans. Until then, let me do my job. Amelia Watson. Amelia snorted and took her phone away. just to catch the end of Sherlock's deductions. Clear signs of tangerine cream around the frown lines. Those tired, clubber eyes. Then there's his underwear. His underwear? Said Molly. Visible of the waistline. Very visible. Very peculiar brand, Sherlock pointed out, reaching for the metal dish Jim had haphazardly placed back on the lab bench. That, plus the extremely suggestive fact that he just left his number under this dish here. He showed Molly the card, and then tossed it with impeccable accuracy to Amelia, who caught it between two fingers without looking up. Sherlock smiled slightly and turned back to Molly. I'd say you'd better break it off now and save yourself the pain. Molly gaped at him for a moment before running out of the room, barely fighting back the tears in her eyes. Charming. Well done, Amelia said dryly. Amelia said dryly, crossing one leg over the other and placing her hands on her knees as she eyed Sherlock. Really nailed this sentiment thing. Just saving her time, Sherlock frowned. Isn't that kinder? Kinder? Amelia repeated in shock. No, Sherlock. That wasn't kind. That was cruel and just plain rude. Sherlock raised his eyebrow. Would you know anything about love, Miss Watson? I like to think so. Curious, Sherlock murmured to himself, then looked to John. Go on, then. You know what I do. Off you go. No, go on. I'm not going to stand here so you can humiliate me while I try and disseminate an outside eye, a second opinion. It's very useful to me, Sherlock interrupted, cutting off the doctor. Yeah, right. Really, Sherlock said. Fine, John said, fed up with the argument. He cleared his throat, picking up one of the shoes. I don't know, they're just a pair of shoes. Trainers. Good, Sherlock said in approval. They're in good nick, John continued. I'd say they're pretty new, except the soles have been well worn. So the owner must have had them for a while. Both Sherlock and Amelia started to sigh when John had said new, but looked relieved when he immediately corrected himself. They're very 80s, probably one of those retro designs, John said, frowning slightly. You're in sparkling form. What else? Sherlock approved. Well, they're quite big, so a man's, John said. But, Amelia prompted as she scanned the trainers with careful eyes, immediately picking out what Sherlock had spotted. John examined the shoes closer, noticing the smudge of blue ink. But there's traces of a name inside and felt tip. Adults don't write their names inside their shoes, so these belong to a kid. Excellent. What else? Sherlock said proudly, glad that John's observation skills were finally improving. He held it upside down. That's it. That's it? Sherlock questioned. John nodded. How did I do? Well, John, really well, Amelia said, pausing momentarily. I mean, you missed almost everything of importance, but, Sherlock turned to her, patiently waiting for her to elaborate. Amelia sighed and leaned across the lab bench, picking up one of them. The owner loved these, scrubbed them clean, whitened them where they got discolored, she continued, explaining everything she'd seen. Even so, there are traces of his flaky skin where his fingers have come into contact with them. So he suffered from eczema. Shoes are well worn, more so on the inside, which means the owner had weak arches. British made, I'd imagine, given everything we know about the bomber, but the style and the coloring, I'd say that they're somewhere between 15 to 25 years old. 20, Sherlock confirmed. 20 years? John said in shock. They're not retro, they're original, Sherlock said in agreement. Good job, Amy. He gave her a soft smile before continuing on. Limited edition, 2 blue stripes, 1989. But there's still mud on them. They look new, John protested. Someone's kept them that way, Sherlock said, cocking his head thoughtfully. Quite a bit of mud caked on the soles. Analyst shows it's from Sussex, with London mud overlaying it. How do you know? Questioned John. Sherlock nodded towards the computer screen, which was brightly flashing results. 2 bright red dots on the border, by the border of East and West Sussex, with another by Southeast London. Pollen, clear as a map reference to me. South of the river, too, Amelia observed aloud. So the kid who owned these trainers came to London from Sussex 20 years ago and left them behind. So what happened to him? John asked. Something bad, Sherlock said. He loved those shoes, remember? He never leave them filthy. Wouldn't let them go unless he had to. So, a child with big feet he trailed off, staring into the distance as he came to a realization. Oh! Amelia frowned. What? Karl Power, said Sherlock. Sorry, who? John said in confusion. Karl Powers, John, Sherlock repeated exasperately. He turned to Amelia, frowning his eyes out, and she had the same expression as John. Eyebrows raised, head slightly tilted forward. Come on, you had to have heard of him. Afraid not. What is it? Amelia said, pressing her knuckles to her lips, leaving a faint lipstick stain on her pale skin. Sherlock's lips were pursed in a thin, straight line. It's where I began. Chapter 9. The Carl Powers Conundrum. Despite knowing that they had 5 hours to solve the Carl Powers conundrum, as John so elegantly put it, although Sherlock disagreed with the statement, Amelia was starting to feel stressed. Granted, she dealt with a lot in the past week, mostly because of Sherlock, but with Jim joining their little party, Amelia was ready to snap, which meant that, most likely, somebody or something was going to get hurt. Amelia spread her papers over the table, drumming her fingers as she thought. According to what Sherlock had said, Carl Powers had been a young, competitive swimmer who'd gone to a swim meet, had some sort of fit, and had drowned. Carl's clothes had been found in his locker, but his shoes were nowhere in sight. Currently, Amelia was trying to determine whether or not the shoes they'd found in 221C had, in fact, belonged to Carl. She flipped through the various photos of the young swimmer, trying to find one where she could match the shoes. John, she called out before remembering that her brother had gone to talk to Mrs. Hudson in 221A. Sherlock? She tried again. What? He barked from downstairs, coming up to the second level, carrying boxes of chemistry equipment. He pushed some of her work to the side and took a seat, preparing his own small laboratory. Amelia sighed. Can I help? You never tell me what's going in that funny little head of yours, and I want to help. There's only 5 hours left. You could help by telling me who the hell Moriarty is, Sherlock snarled, slamming his fist down on the table. A mug threatened to topple off the surface, but Sherlock caught it just before it fell and placed it gently on the floor. He blew out a breath and rubbed his temples. I don't know, Amelia lied. She got up and patted Sherlock on the back, leaning over his shoulder to speak to him in his ear. Sherlock, it's all right. You just need to breathe, yeah? Amelia immediately started to back off as John knocked on the kitchen door. But Sherlock caught her hand, keeping her close. It's your brother, John said to Sherlock, holding his phone in the air. He's texting me now. How does he know my number? How does he not know your number? Amelia muttered, snatching the phone out of John's hands. He's Mycroft. She frowned down at the message, rolling her eyes. Any developments? Mycroft home. Must be a root canal, Sherlock mused aloud. Look, John said, exasperated, with Sherlock drawling. He did say national importance. Sherlock snorted, handing a newspaper article to Amelia, who took it and promptly crushed it in her hands. Sherlock narrowed his eyes in disapproval. How quaint, he said. What is? John said. You are, Sherlock answered. Queen and country. You can't just ignore it, Amelia said sternly, rummaging through the fridge and pulling out a large, uncooked beef roast in a metal dish. Amelia grabbed a few peeled potatoes and carrots, along with a few chunks of onion, and threw it into the dish with the roast. Amelia smiled, thankful that Mrs. Hudson had prepared everything beforehand. I'm not ignoring it, John said, rolling his eyes. Putting my best man onto it right now. Right. Good. John nodded, folding his arms across his chest. He blinked once, then looked to Sherlock, puzzled. Who's that? Sherlock smiled knowingly. Why, you, of course, he said, turning to John. He steepled his fingers, eyeing Amelia. You could go, too, if you wished. I'm good, thanks, Amelia said, placing the roast on the counter and opening the oven. She grimaced, pulling out a baking tray full of baked toast. Amelia sighed, setting the tray on the table. She turned on the oven and waited for it to heat up. John rubbed his temples, sighing. Fine, okay. He grabbed his sweater off the chair and slung it over his arms. How am I supposed to find Mycroft anyways? He's Mycroft, for God's sake. It's like trying to get Sherlock to be nice. Nearly impossible. Amelia snorted, covering her mouth with her hand. Sherlock shot her a glare. Why don't you take your brother to go see Mycroft? I'm sure you know where he is. Amelia narrowed her eyes. William Sherlock Scott Holmes, you owe me one, she said warningly. I was in the middle of cooking. John choked in on the air in his throat. Your name is... Yes, shut up. Is that a problem? Sherlock raised an eyebrow, certain that it was Mycroft who'd given Amelia Sherlock's full name. When neither John nor Amelia said anything, Sherlock clapped his hands together. No? Then I see no further reason as to why you two are here. I believe my brother is expecting you, and we mustn't keep him waiting. He'd burn down all of London, Amelia said sarcastically, placing the roast in the oven. If that burns, so help me God, Sherlock, I'm holding you responsible, and will string you up by your ears. She tucked her car keys into her pocket. And on that note, she saluted him mockingly, causing both Sherlock and John to roll their eyes. I believe a farewell is considered polite, Sherlock called after to John and Amelia. The youngest Watson laughed. Since when do you know anything about being polite? You're Sherlock Holmes. Excellent observation skills, my dear, Sherlock said as Amelia slammed the door shut behind John. He shifted positions in his seat, collecting the things Amelia had been working on and moving them to the other side of the table before resuming his work. Poison, Sherlock said as Mrs. Hudson came into the room. What are you going on about? Clostridium botulinum, he yelled, slamming his hands down on the table. She cringed visually, fleeing from the room just as Amelia and John walked in. Sherlock looked at them. It's one of the deadliest poisons on the planet. John looked at him blankly, unsure of what he was talking about. Sherlock groaned. Carl's powers. Oh, wait, are you saying he was murdered? Amelia said sarcastically. Sherlock stood, not understanding Amelia's sarcasm, and walking to where he placed Carl Power's trainers. Remember the shoelaces? She nodded. The boy suffered from eczema. It'd be the easiest thing in the world to introduce the poison into his medication. 2 hours later, he comes up to London, the poison takes effects, paralyzes the muscle, and he drowns. What? How come the autopsy didn't pick that up? John asked, blinking rapidly. It's virtually undetectable, Amelia explained. Nobody would have been looking for it. Sherlock leapt from his seat, running over to his laptop and hastily opening it to his website, pulling up the option for a new blog post. Post on the science of deduction. Found. Pair of trainers belong to Carl Powers. 1978-1989. Sherlock straightened and pointed to the shoelaces. But there were still tiny traces of it left inside the trainer from where he put the cream on his feet. Sherlock continued on, still typing. Botulinum toxin still present. Apply 221B, Baker Street. That's what they had to go, Amelia said, admiring Jim's ingenuity. Clever. She turned around to see that Sherlock had taken the roast out the oven. Oh, thank you for that. I was quite worried. So how do we let the bomber know? John asked. Get his attention, Sherlock said, gesturing to his laptop. Stop the clock. The killer kept the shoes all these years, John said, interested as to why. Yes, Sherlock looked to John, meaning he's our bomber, John finished with a great, large sigh. Amelia ran to the coffee table as the pink phone began to ring, answering the call immediately. Well done, sexy, the woman sobbed. Come and get me, or maybe I'll keep her and give you another mark to prove you are mine. Maybe this one could be more temporary and far more pleasurable. Sherlock took the phone out of Amelia's hands, frowning over how pale she had gotten. Where are you? Tell us where you are, he demanded. Amelia started scratching frantically at the tattoo on her arm, with a barely contained fury, a look of determination on her face. Get it off, she muttered repeatedly, breathing heavily. Sherlock scribbled something down on a pad of paper, hung up on the woman, and rushed over to Amelia, trying to keep her from clawing out her tattoo any further. She'd drawn blood, and Sherlock pressed his hands over the ink, barely flinching as Amelia didn't let him deter her, instead scratching at the back of Sherlock's hand. Amy, stop, he commanded. John, pass me that cloth, Sherlock said, pointing to a damp rag by the sink. John complied, wrinkling his nose at the pungent smell exuding off the fabric. Sherlock immediately held it against Amelia's nose and mouth. She let out a shriek and attempted to fight Sherlock off, but Sherlock was far taller and far stronger than she was. He pinned her down until she stopped struggling, eyes drooping closed. Jesus, John said, horrified. Did you? It's just chloroform. She'll be fine, Sherlock said, setting Amelia down on the couch gently. Lestrade's on his way to get the woman. I told him to bring a bomb defusing squad and to leave Anderson at Scotland Yard. How'd you know there was a bomb? Sherlock sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose in exasperation. Dear God, I had forgotten how slow you were. He let out another sigh. It's quite obvious, John. Even a person as dull as you. John cleared his throat. Sherlock gritted his teeth, then picked Amelia up. Come along, John, he said in a demanding tone, grabbing his long coat and draping it over Amelia's chest. Sherlock looked down at Amelia, his heart hammering in his chest. Sherlock turned to John. Is there a problem? You seem worried, John observed, eyeing Sherlock shaking hands as he carried Amelia down the stairs, setting her down in the back seat of a car. Sherlock slid into the driver's side. It would appear so, Sherlock murmured. Is this normal? I've never felt this way before. I don't know. You tell me. You are the genius, after all. Am I nervous, John? He stretched John's name out almost to the point where it rhymed with the word yawn. Sherlock frowned as he backed out of the space. Is this what being nervous feels like? I've never felt nervous before. Sherlock, eyes on the road, John shouted as they swerved into the oncoming traffic. Sherlock's phone buzzed half an hour later, signifying a message from John. He remained seated in his chair at 221B Baker Street before letting out a reluctant huff of air, pushing himself out of the chair. He picked up his phone, his eyes scanning the message. She's awake and she's asking for you. Says for you to bring the second pair. Apparently you know what she means. JW, look, you've got me doing it too. Sherlock smiled slightly at John's message, grabbing his scarf off the cloak rack along with his coat. He paused for a moment, grabbing a matching scarf and coat from his bedroom closet. Although John didn't know, he actually had several of these coats and scarves stowed away. Sherlock quickly ran downstairs, slamming the door to 221B behind him. He hailed a cab. St. Bart's Hospital, as quick as you can. Sherlock paused and said, if you can make it there in less than 5 minutes, I'll double the fare. He tapped his fingers against the window impatiently, hopping out of the cab before it even stopped. He tossed the money at the cabbie, firmly closing the door to the cab. He hurried into the hospital, stopping at the secretary's desk. Sherlock Holmes, I'm here to see Amelia Watson. Amelia Watson, the secretary murmured, going through the files. I'm sorry, but we're only letting family in to see her right now. Oh, I'm her fiancé. Our wedding's next week, Sherlock lied smoothly. I had to cancel her cake sampling. I don't think she's going to be happy. The secretary nodded sympathetically. Right, of course. Sorry, she said, nodding. She's in room 218. Thank you, Sherlock said, grinning. He hurried up the stairs to her room, knowing the layout of this place by heart. He knocked on the door of Amelia's room, opening the door. Her arm had been wrapped up in cloth bandage and rested limply by her side. Coat, scarf, give, she demanded. Why? To make my great escape, of course, said Amelia, swinging her legs out of the bed. Thank you so very much for knocking me out. Made my entire day so much better. I really needed the extra kick. Sarcasm? Obviously. Amelia rolled her eyes as she grabbed Sherlock's second coat and draped it around her shoulders. She tucked her hair under the collar, proceeding to tie his scarf around her neck. We're going to have to do this quickly. John's going to notice the height difference. I mean, he's oblivious, but he isn't that oblivious. 5 minutes later. Sherlock, John started as Amelia hurried out of the room, head lowered and dressed in Sherlock's clothing. Sherlock following after her. John frowned, thinking he was seeing double. Amelia ignored her brother and practically ran out of St. Bart's. She waited for the youngest Holmes in the alley behind the hospital, turning down the collar of Sherlock's coat, adjusting her hair. Did he fall for it? She asked. Sherlock scoffed. We'll have to explain it to John later. He was rather confused. Sherlock held out his arm, reaching for his coat, but Amelia simply smirked and curtsied, hand on her elbow. Sherlock held back a laugh. Shall we? Indeed we shall. She ruffled her hair, letting her dark locks tumble over the front of Sherlock's coat. I hope you're aware that I'm never giving this back. She scanned the traffic for a sign of a cab, flinching as they passed a car, and its alarm set off. Sherlock briefly wondered why that Amelia, an MI5 agent, would be so startled by a car alarm. Her next word took him by surprise. Well, that's rather alarming. Sherlock quirked an eyebrow, holding back a chuckle. You're rather amusing. I try, and I could say the... Amelia heard a shout from behind her, and she turned to see that John had emerged from the front of the hospital, immediately spotting the two of them, and started to chase after them. Shit! Come on, Amelia grabbed Sherlock's hand without hesitation and darted across the busy road, swerving around cars, still searching for a cab. The car's in the back lot. There isn't enough time, she snarled, finally finding a cab and sighting in. 221B Baker Street, if you will. Make it quick. The cabbie nodded, then gestured to John, who was, with great difficulty, catching up to the cab. Should I wait for your friend over there? Not my friend, Amelia hastily corrected. He's my brother, and actually the person we're trying to avoid. Ah, I see, the cabbie said, smiling. He nodded at Amelia and Sherlock. He doesn't approve of you two being together. We're just, never mind, Amelia muttered, crossing her arms over her chest as the cabbie pulled out onto the street, just as John approached them. John shot Amelia a glare, silently telling her they would discuss this later. She turned to Sherlock, thinking about the cabbie's words, and the fact that the secretary had believed him to be her fiancé. Why do you like me so much? She pondered aloud, furrowing her eyebrows. I enjoy your company, he said simply, shrugging, as he was unsure of where this conversation was going. He shifted positions in his seat, facing Amelia. His chest began to tighten, although he didn't know why. Why? She questioned, narrowing her eyes demandingly. I'm ordinary and boring. Sherlock shrugged again, though this time he lacked the finesse about it, his mind racing. That's not entirely true. Some people may think so, but in my opinion, he's cleared his throat, unused to having to talk about opinions and feelings. You're quite brilliant. Fantastic, she said sarcastically, rolling her eyes. Sherlock's compliment had taken her aback, but she didn't let it show, covering it in a layer of near rudeness. Now I'm brilliant and boring. Like that's something I'd put on my Facebook profile. Brilliant and boring, looking for a friend, possibly a boyfriend. She snorted at the ridiculous concept, but continued on. Everyone would rather have pretty and thick than brilliant but boring. I don't, Sherlock said quietly. Don't what? Amelia questioned, her voice becoming softer as she looked at Sherlock. I don't want pretty and thick. I'd much rather have brilliant and boring, because if they're brilliant enough to entertain me, they're not boring, Sherlock said softly, his eyes meeting Amelia's grey ones. And you, my dear, are delightfully interesting, not boring in the slightest. Amelia blushed, the red creeping up on her cheeks. She looked down at her lap, her eyes flickering up towards Sherlock from under the lashes. Mr. Holmes, are you flirting with me? She smiled suggestively. Now what would my brother say about that, You know him better than I do, Sherlock said breezily, as Amelia leaned into his shoulder. I don't think that's true, she murmured, smoothly stepping out of the cab as it came to a stop. She paused at 221B's door, unlocking it with a coy smile before quickly shutting it behind her. Sherlock stared after her, bewildered, until the cabby quietly cleared his throat. Right, yes, of course, Sherlock said, handing the cabby the fare. He stepped out of the cab, firmly closing the door behind him. He turned the handle and walked inside. Was that Amelia? Mrs. Hudson asked in concern. I thought she was supposed to be in the hospital. She is, Sherlock turned brightly, placing a hand on Mrs. Hudson's arm. So don't tell John. He ran up the stairs 3 at a time, with Mrs. Hudson following, slamming the door to his flat shut in Mrs. Hudson's face. She threw her hands up in the air tiredly, walking back downstairs.